customer experience, especially over the last 10 years, has become top of mind to everyone. 89% of companies compete primarily on the basis of customer experience.
Hello and welcome to Page Break, where I interview private and corporate sector professionals about how writing, technical writing, communication, persuasion and argumentation, and presentation skills are intrinsic to the work they do and the success for not only their professional lives, but also the organizations for which they work. My name is Danielle Morse, and I've been a professor of literature and writing for over 10 years. In Page Break Insert 1, I am so excited to interview Lisa Farrar, who has spent 11 years in the automotive industry in various executive positions. Lisa is currently the Senior Director of B2B and Product Marketing at Cars.com. She started her career in automotive while in college, driving at a local Mannheim auto auction. From leading the global electric vehicle program at Nissan to determining expand the pie strategies for automotive dealers, OEMs, and vendors at Cox Automotive, CDK Global, and Cars.com, Lisa approaches the industry's toughest problems with a deep appreciation for customer experience. She has emerged as an industry thought leader, advocating for dealerships and OEMs in a rapidly changing environment. Lisa holds an M.B.A. from Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management and a B.B.A. from William & Mary. In addition to serving on J.D. Power's Auto Revolution Advisory Board, she proudly serves on the Board of Advocations, a consultancy specializing in matching professionals with disabilities with inclusive companies nationwide. Lisa, can you speak to your work background and some specific projects that you've developed and or collaborated on during your career that have informed and shaped who you are?
Sure. And thank you, Danielle, so much for having me this evening. I'm delighted to join you for Page Break. So with that, there's probably two capstone moments in my career that have shaped who I am today as a professional. And first off, number one would be leading the global electric vehicle portfolio for Nissan. As you're probably familiar, the Nissan Leaf, for whether you like it or whether you don't, is a vehicle with some challenges and a lot of opportunities. And there were people that really loved it because it became a very practical way for them to have a second car they may not otherwise be able to afford, and the environmental benefits of not having to get gas. So very challenging, meaty project. I think one of my favorite examples of it was the fact that if I can get my in-laws to drive Nissan Leafs, like I can get anybody to drive Nissan Leafs, and they probably became some of my biggest brand ambassadors at their local Publix down in Southwest Florida. So showing it off to all their friends. But that was a really, really exciting project that grew me as a leader. It taught me the importance of knowing all aspects of marketing, promotions, pricing, distribution, what else? And then finally, in terms of Leaf, it was something that was just a passion project. It was something where I really had to roll up my sleeves and figure out how we were going to sell more in a really short amount of time. And then second, in terms of my other kind of capstone moment in my career, and I was told by one of my mentors and the chief strategy officer of Cox Automotive once that people are lucky if they have two in their career. And I think my second would be the privilege to quitting my job and going back to grad school full time. I am someone who comes from a family, unfortunately, who is not college educated. I'm the first person in my family to go to college, let alone graduate. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of pride and a lot of responsibility. So to quit one's gainful employment out in Silicon Valley and take on all this debt to go back to grad school in Chicago, where I live now, was definitely something that was a little bit daunting, but I couldn't imagine not having done it. It enabled me to live in country in Japan. It enabled me to build friendships that 10 years on the other side of business school, I'm still in constant contact with some of my friends, and to really give back to the community that I was a part of. So I think that between the Nissan Leaf and Kellogg, I was really fortunate, or I am really fortunate.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those and what are not only professional but very personal moments. So you've had a lot of personal experiences emerge from those professional opportunities, which I think make them even more meaningful to individuals. And like you said, it's the person you quoted about you're lucky to have two in your life, right? That it's you know, it's not everybody has those experiences. So hopefully we strive for them.
Yes.
And then, all right, so I'm going to move on to my next question.
Okay.
Firstly, do you identify as a writer or technical writer, and why or why not?
So in terms of the way that I think about this question, I likely identify as neither, Danielle. I mean, you are the professional, you're the writer. Professionals get paid to write. I think that in my career, I get paid to come up with ideas, but they go nowhere if I can't communicate the vision, what they are, what the essence of what I'm trying to do is to others. So although I don't see myself, and before talking to you today, I really never thought of myself as a writer, writing has been critical to my success.
And that's always a question that we work with on students, who, especially for students, you know, in programs that are not, say, a writing degree, an English degree, a humanities-based degree, where writing is often expected, right? So there's so many people in the private and corporate sector who are working jobs that sometimes include a lot of writing, but the people don't necessarily identify as writers themselves, or necessarily weren't trained to do that. Or at least in some ways, you know, in some ways they were hopefully trained, but not maybe in all of the ways. So moving on, in a 2019 article published by Forbes, titled "Why Writing Ability is the Most Important Skill in Business," Jeff Bradford argues that any management consultant will tell you that communication skills are vital to success in business. Business is fundamentally about getting other people to do things, and that all forms of communication require good writing skills. So how would you respond to Bradford, Lisa? And what are your thoughts about his argument that writing is the most important skill in business?
So I would say that I agree with Jeff. I think that even if you don't think it, I'm going to tell you, as someone who has worked in business for over 20 years, especially as you go to the higher ranks, or you're trying to get ahead, or even if you're trying to enter, like with a resume, people are unfortunately always judging you. And sometimes your writing is a real indicator of whether or not you're qualified for the job, whether or not your argument is sound for what you're trying to advocate for. So everything you say or write is being either used for or against you. So in writing, you actually get to choose. So you should use this power and this insight to your benefit. And I have two examples of this. So for instance, I had a gentleman who was really excited. He was a director on one of my leadership teams that I've had, to write me a recommendation. I was someone who had coached him closely and mentored him, and he was going to write me this recommendation on LinkedIn. And I said, sure, I would be honored if you would write me a recommendation. And I saw it, and I kind of cringed, because I thought to myself, this is someone who I, first of all, have seen their work, and they probably just wrote this pretty hastily. And I inferred this whole story to myself about, I mean, was he, for instance, multitasking at the time? If you're gonna sit here and offer to do this unprompted for your boss, I think you would put your best foot forward. And I mean, so I caught myself judging him of was he multitasking? How far should I go with, for instance, he used the term her and I, and I literally kind of cringed, and I was like, I have to send this back for revisions, but how do I do that without, for instance, not being appreciative of what he offered to do for me? So it's one of those things where, even though this is someone that I know is incredibly capable, someone I've taken under my wing, whom I've got promoted, unfortunately, this one little piece of writing that probably took him less than 5 minutes, you guys all know how short LinkedIn recommendations are, judged, came out with all of these things, and it became a bigger deal than it really needs to be. And then in that same vein, for instance, whenever I receive emails, and please forgive me, I've been working in business for a long time, anything that's beyond a scroll, I'm just not going to read. So if you're sending me dense War and Peace emails, that means you don't respect my time, and you don't have any self-control to get your point across in a more concise manner. So I think that what I guess I'm putting all together here is back to Jeff's hypothesis that writing is and communication skills are vital, they're like the penultimate, because you're just never going to get past like the kind of price of entry if you can't write concisely and in a way that uses proper grammar. And for those of us that aren't writers, I use Grammarly as a great, like, I'm not a paid spokesman for it, but I put a lot of my important writing through that before I send it on to make sure I don't make those gaffes that I saw in the gentleman that wrote me the recommendation on LinkedIn, for instance. So I say it's vital to success.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
those are, professors have similar questions when we're grading writing. If something is,
I don't envy you, students or professors. That's why I work for public companies.
you know, when we're faced with a paper I always tell my students, an A paper takes me maybe 2 minutes to grade, right? Because they've done all the work. They've done all the work of communication. I don't have to, I can just read everything and follow along really easily. It's those, you know, when we get into the C's and the D's and the more problematic writing, that it takes a lot of my time to kind of go through, and I have to connect the dots as the reader. And so there's sometimes when you know, it's often for professors to be confused about, is this just hastily written writing, or is this person genuinely not understanding what they're supposed to be doing? So that's a fine line to cross. When it comes to technical writing and not academic writing, I always try to beef up the benefit of concision, that it is this short, to the point writing that has to be really clear and not floofed up. And not that academic writing is floofy, it's just that there's a lot more writing that goes into academic writing, and because it's a different genre. So definitely some crossover there. So thank you for your very thoughtful answer.
My pleasure.
Okay, so moving on to my next question. In his 2013 article called "Your Company is Only Good as Your Writing," published by the Harvard Business Review, the founder of iFixit, which is they emphasize their focus is really on the free training and writing of technical manuals. So the founder, Kyle Wiens, posits that the practice of good collaborative writing makes the difference between great business and bad business, and that it's not easy to talk about writing, certainly not in business. Even writing in public arenas, is always personal. It exposes the writer's ideas and inability, to navigate language. Writing is vulnerability. So Lisa, I'm curious as to your thoughts about Wiens' position that not only is a company as good as its writing, but that in business, writing is personal and vulnerable.
I feel like I'm a pushover, 100%. Writing is personal and vulnerable because when you're writing, you don't get the benefit of an instant rebuttal. So when we're having a conversation like this, I can chime in and I can add something or add some context, whereas what you say must measure up to a number of aspirational criteria that you just mentioned. For instance, it has to be clear, it has to be concise, it has to be effective, all in one fell swoop. So because you don't get a second chance to clarify that email or that investor like prospectus or that report, what you have to write is something that anyone can essentially pick up, get briefed on it, for instance, to be conversant enough of like what you're trying to express. And then it has to be one of those things where it could also be handed off to someone else without a backstory. So I actually, having led communications teams, have seen this come through. And the more skilled writers that I know, people who practice this often and take, I mean, it's also a little bit of a mindset. You can take every single email that you send and start thinking about it as, I'm practicing my writing. And I know I'm going to sit here and say Grammarly again, but Grammarly will even give you like little emojis about what type of tone you're conveying in your writing. And I think that that's really helpful for some of us that don't classify ourselves as writers, because after you practice that way and think about this as, I'm going to try to be as clear and as concise and effective as I possibly can, your writing will get better over time, and it just takes some practice. So to me, sometimes when I hear the word personal and vulnerable, I completely agree, because I could have written, for instance, for our CEO, a communication to all our dealer bodies. So this is going to go to 20,000 people overnight in the wake of this COVID-19 crisis. And the criteria that I obviously put on that piece of writing is it empathetic to the situation that's going on? Is it something that is very, I guess, audience centered? It's not Cars.com's agenda, for instance. It's very empathetic to them. Is it clear? Do they know what they're going to get? Are they going to feel better after they've received it? Are they even going to read it? So I kind of tick out some of my criteria that way so that I can make sure that it has that balance of both personal and vulnerable, even, for instance, when I'm writing for someone else's voice. So I think that it's something that just comes really clear, and I will say that I will write something sometimes and then I'll hand it off to my leader of communications, and she makes it better. So sometimes writing can also be a very iterative process, especially in business, because you're not going to always just be the only person on the team writing something or some type of proposal. So I take it as like, I'm going to get it so far, and then I feel confidence that I have a strong team that they're going to take it to the next level.
Thank you so much. There's so much that I could bounce off of that in terms of it being iterative, which it absolutely is. I think all levels of writing, which include emails, blogging, creating videos, doing interviews like this, right? Like the writing of interview questions, giving feedback on writing, there's so much that constitutes what writing is. So, and it definitely is an iterative process. And thankfully it's an iterative process, but there is that moment where we have to release our writing to the world and to other people. And that can be a really scary thing, because people are going to form identities for you based on what you put out in your writing. You're not there with your writing any longer to say, no, let me make sure that you're getting really the empathy that I'm trying to put forth in this, or this other thing that I'm trying to say. So just like those emojis you talked about in terms of tone and style, I think it's like, okay, I hope that I'm not, when I can't represent my writing with the face-to-face recipients or recipients of this writing, that they will correctly be able to get the tone and the message that I'm trying to send. So it can be a really scary thing.
It can be very scary, and I think that in the business world, we're allowed the grace as opposed to academia. I will say that you're probably allowed more grace with like 80% is good enough, right? There's probably some diminishing returns to an extra hour sitting there wordsmithing that email that goes to the CEO of your company. Whereas I think in academia, sometimes you guys that are really skilled in it, or people that are students like our audience today, have to really put that extra level of care. And so there's hope in sight. As long as you use proper grammar, sometimes people will give you the benefit of the doubt. It's when you don't, but they're kind of like, oh, that guy's an idiot. So.
And kindness, a little kindness and etiquette will go a long way. It is so
totally
underappreciated, I think, in these days. So I think with the COVID-19, it's actually maybe has fostered more kindness and more empathy. I know for me as a professor, I've become a little bit more kinder and empathetic in the way that I talk to my students.
That's wonderful. I think that I actually have silly trite books on my shelf over behind my screen, like for instance, The Power of Nice and The Art of Practicing Gratitude and stuff like that. And I think that this, to your point, this current situation, I hope, especially in my case, for instance, I don't necessarily want to go, I think there's a lot of people that are reminiscent for the past, and don't get me wrong, I want to go back to restaurants and I want to get people employed again and that. But I think that unfortunately, or I'm always like someone who's looking for the silver lining, the consummate optimist, this has given me an excuse to take a time out and to just, for instance, take a breath, take a beat, and be really immensely grateful for really, really basic things right now, like my health or the health of my family or being able to talk to you guys today. And I just feel like being busy isn't, for instance, a direct equation to getting results or being best to myself. So I actually, in terms of writing, I actually have like a little notebook that I keep in my desk, and I try to practice gratitude every day because I haven't had that luxury in a long time. So I figured I'd take myself up on that offer during this time.
That's a really good, actually, I might take you up on that advice. I need to practice. I'm so busy trying to, because I work with students every day, I'm so busy trying to generate more empathy to them that I think that I've left a dearth of it in my own life. So I like that idea of practicing gratitude for yourself, I think is a wonderful lesson. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on to my next question. And this is somebody who's in your city, Dr. Martha Nussbaum, who's an American philosopher and professor of law and ethics for the University of Chicago's Department of Philosophy and Law School, has argued that business leaders love the humanities because they know that to innovate, you need more than rote knowledge. You need a trained imagination. So to provide a little context about the humanities, this field uses a vast array of methodologies to explore and understand what it means to be human. The goal of research in the humanities, which includes writing, is to help shape individuality and community and ask who we are and what our lives mean. In order for this work to occur, critical thinking and innovation is necessary. So how are things like critical thinking and innovation, which are key tenets of humanistic work, which include writing and communication, as opposed to rote knowledge, as Dr. Nussbaum references, vital in solving problems in the projects you've worked on and overseen?
So in my mind, critical thinking and innovation are, I would say, essential in today's business world. I think that a lot of companies, you can pick up any edition of Harvard Business Review, and there's always an article about innovation. In fact, I even have like a little book on my desk called Little Bets. It's kind of an oldie but a goodie, and I haven't read it yet. And one of my mentors told me I should read it. And it says how breakthrough ideas emerge from small discoveries. And from where I sit, innovation can happen in many different ways, and you can memorize specific information. There's lots of people that can be subject matter experts on some line of code or some system or the architecture of how we're going to implement. For instance, we're going to take 3 Salesforce instances down to 1 in my company right now. And I think that having subject matter expertise is important. But again, back to the point of, if you can't communicate why this matters or why it's going to be making for instance, a lasting impact on your company, or how it's going to increase revenue, or how it's going to make your charity stronger, whatever you want to do, this is something that is going to enable you to get ahead. So especially when you think about this investment that you guys are making in yourselves right now as students, I mean, I'm familiar with the demographic. I mean, you guys have actively served, many of you. You're not, 18 years old, et cetera. I mean, many are at different stages of their personal career as well as their professional career. And I think that if you would like to be a manager, if you want to be a boss someday, if you want to be a CEO someday, if you want to be the supervisor of the mailroom one day, being able to come up with those insights and being able to come up with those ideas is critical to getting ahead. Otherwise, you stay in your pond. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong staying in your pond. There's a lot of people where, just knowing how to do your job on a daily basis is important. But if you're someone who is fueled by, contributing or achieving more, or, being able to work your way up to another grade in your career, for instance, if you're for instance, if you're a 420, maybe you want to be a 440, whatever your career, your employer has as levels, being able to think critically, being able to articulate your ideas and why it matters is a path to success, no matter any way you slice it. So those people from Chicago are pretty smart.
I would agree. It makes me think of, in essence, what we're talking about a little bit, or what are often called soft skills. Mm-hmm. I like to take my cue from the president of Dartmouth, who refers to them as power skills instead of soft skills, because
I like it when people give things a strong rebrand. That's
Yes.
awesome. I'm going to start using that.
Power skills, because he's a very strong advocate that these are skills like critical thinking and problem solving and decision making and mentoring and empowering and innovating. These are skills that are not just easily gotten, right? They're hard
Yeah.
won talents and skill sets that often accrue through a variety of contexts and work and over the years. And so, and you also reminded me of Google's project Oxygen from their 2008 and 2018 study, where this idea of being a subject matter expertise is not all that it is all that it's cracked up to be, but it kind of also isn't, because it's kind of presumed when you're hired that you contain a level of expertise in your particular field. But what Google's research found in both 2008 and 2018, right, is that this particular research project, Project Oxygen, really was looking at the attributes of high-performing managers. And the original 2008 results came back with, I believe, a total of 8. And the last one, they were all power skills, with the exception of the last one, which was technical expertise, which was that subject matter expertise in order to help their team members, right? Their direct reports.
Right.
And then when they redid the study in 2018, they added 2 more on there that were under the number 8 to include something like collaborative and decision making. But still, technical expertise was quite low on there too.
Yeah.
And this was Google's way of getting engineers on board with the fact that leaders and supervisors and managers are needed and they're important for the direction of the organization. And those power skills are really sought after in companies, even in tech companies and in Silicon Valley, where they want those power skills. And not just that you can code all day and create awesome algorithms and products, right? But that you have the ability to communicate with a team to do even more.
Absolutely. And I have 2 anecdotes to bolt onto that. So for instance, I started I've been working in automotive for 11 years, but I actually was with IBM for a total of 7 years before I graduated from business school. And to your point, at least at the time when I started, it was after the dot-com bust, and it was before the late 2000 recession, 2008 recession. And IBM thankfully had 2 paths, and they were incredibly probably ahead of their time with regard to the importance of a good manager. So they had 2 paths. They had ways that you could achieve more by staying a technical leader with no direct reports. And then if you were a people leader with direct reports, you got compensated more, your path to better opportunities was higher, et cetera. And it allowed people to choose. But I would say that the people who chose the more people-centered, be a technical leader and a people leader, I mean, they were just so much more respected than their counterparts that just stayed SMEs in their craft. And then even like another anecdote that I have, so thankfully IBM had that foresight. And they also, before I ever got my first team at IBM, I had to go to 6 weeks of new manager training to better understand how to get at the heart of, what matters to people, how to motivate people, how to give performance evaluations, et cetera. And I mean, you think of that level of training, like imagine in corporate America getting 6 weeks of anything these days. And it was something that I have always looked back on as, wow, that really set them apart, and they were just a wonderful employer. I don't know what it's like to work there now. I haven't been there in a long time. But a second anecdote would be an experience that I actually had at Ford. So Ford has an innovation lab adjacent to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And I had the privilege of working with the teams there. And even for newly minted computer science degree majors, they all code in pods and in buddies. And it takes things from agile, from like waterfall to agile to what the new thing is called extreme. And what they do is they actually sit there and peer critique the lines of code. And they're also the first line of defense should the code break. So it's one of those things where you're inherently incentivized to build in quality because you've got someone over your shoulder who thinks they can do it better, who's kind of competitive. And then second, like if you're the person that's going to get the call on a Saturday night at 3 a.m. that the code broke for Ford Labs, like you're going to make sure that the code doesn't break. So you're going to build a lot of care into what you're going to ship. So I just think that, and then that layer of 2 rolls up to a pod of 8 that has to work together as a team to get a solution out the door. So it's definitely not anything where it's just like one person kind of lone wolves being like these coders. And it's kind of funny because when I started thinking about the answer to this, I serve on the board of this company called Advocations, and we enable people with disabilities to be matched with inclusive companies nationwide. And I mean, some of what I'm talking about today and the importance of teams kind of is counterintuitive to that because sometimes the tech community is more singular or the STEM community is more singular. And I would just attest to people that if you're not comfortable with being a communicator, allow people to give you feedback and just try to learn from it. You're never going to learn unless you put yourself out there and let people know that you're trying to get better at something. And they will give you that kindness, empathy, and grace that Danielle spoke to earlier.
Hopefully they will.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. I've gotten some feedback in my days that have not been so kind. But hopefully those days are gone for everybody. So thank you for sharing those 2 anecdotes. I think those are super relevant, especially with this idea of working in teams, right? That's a place where writing and communication happens. So I talked a little bit about the humanities. I would like to just briefly give you a kind of a definition, a newer definition of technical writing itself.
Okay.
So, excuse me, to talk a little bit more about how technical writing is part of the work you do, Lisa, let me provide as brief a definition as I can on technical writing. It is a very kind of in the works field. It's always changing. I think that's due in part to the changing nature of corporate America and the private sector. So historically, technical writing has been associated with the creation of user or instruction manuals, which it still is to this day, for example, with iFixit. However, in the last 20 years, what technical writing has changed is to meet the growing complexities of how people need to communicate complex ideas to an array of different audiences. And even the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has modified the definition of technical writing to, quote, a growing number of technical communicators, are using technical content to resolve business communications problems in a diversifying number of industries, unquote. And so additionally, research shows that more businesses are using technical writing to, quote, effectively manage the information that must be communicated. They also build a content management strategy that encompasses delivery of technical, marketing and promotion, internal and other communication messages between the organization and its customers, suppliers, investors, and employees. So Lisa, in your work experiences then, can you speak to how maybe this newer version, right, in the last 20 years, and in academia, 20 years is quite recent. Can you speak to how technical writing and technical communication has been important in some key projects that you've overseen?
Absolutely, Danielle. So as you mentioned at the forefront of the call, currently I head up our product marketing team at cars.com. And if you're not familiar with product marketing, if you're thinking about a Venn diagram with like 3 little bubbles, you've got people who are fairly strong marketers. So they're people who can think about a go-to-market strategy or building a value prop of like why this product would matter or why it would add value to your business. You've got people who are technically enabled. So you've got a bubble, for instance, you've got a foot into like the engineering community because you have to work on a daily basis with our engineers that are actually building the products. And then the last bubble would be sales, because at the end of the day, someone's got to go to our customers and put this in front of them and say, will you buy it? Is this compelling enough? So I think that the new definition for technical writing encompasses so many fields because of how the information just flows in so many more directions. If you think about historical technical writing, we would build a piece of code or we would build a product and then we would write a technical manual and you would need a PhD sometimes to actually understand what it does. Whereas technical writing today is something that if you, I mean, I would even say watching a YouTube video could be a form of technical writing if it's been scripted. I think that the way that we consume and the pace of change is so much faster that you have to be able to, for instance, in the field that I'm in, of product marketing, you have to be able to be nimble enough to shift with the needs of your customers, the needs of your sellers, the needs of investor relations, if they're gonna sit there and talk to Wall Street about an upcoming product or a new release that we're gonna do at a big trade show. And everyone at the end of the day has to be able to say, oh, I've got that. I understand how it's different and why it matters. So I think that technical writing was one thing, but we now use, I mean, so for instance, we use a revenue enablement system that stores a lot of this content for our sellers. And we, as different stakeholders in the organization, can go out and source this information. May it be a spec sheet, which has one purpose. May it be a strategic brief for the product, which is a different purpose. As an internal document, it's like a one-page sell sheet, like for sales to pick up, like a more sales, like, you know, features, benefits, etc., in sales type language. So I think that what you're getting at is the fact that what used to just be, and I can remember even when I started at IBM, this group of people that had English degrees and wrote on technical features has become this whole ecosystem where there's a lot more stakeholder management and a lot higher stakes, because it's not just sitting on some shelf anymore. It's digital, it moves fast, and it has to be accurate enough and relevant enough that people read it so they get the best value out of your product or service.
Yeah, and I'm wondering even if to some degree what IBM once was, or kind of like that pre-Silicon Valley kind of landscape of technology in the old days of Apple and in the old days of Microsoft and in the old days of those kind of original, you know,
We had technical librarians that would manage a library of manuals.
Right.
And I think about, I mean, let's think about this now. In the world, so I had a project probably a year ago at this time where we tried to instill an agile process to how we would buy marketing campaigns every day through Google. And what we would do is we would try to like align supply and demand. So if there was like a lot of people searching for cars in this one area of the country, we would go and buy certain keywords so that we could stay above the fold in the top result of search. And we would do this and monitor it on a daily basis, as opposed to like a set it and forget it. And in order to learn from that experience as a marketing team and be able to take those insights back to products and how we could better build the site so we wouldn't have to pay so much money to Google, you technically don't often think that marketing would be coming with a technical requirement that we wanted to get put on the roadmap to get built for an enhancement to the cars.com website. That did not happen in the early days. Marketing was just those fluffy people that, you know, like hung balloons and served hot dogs and put ads in the paper or whatever we did.
But now you're more actively part of this ecosystem. That
yes, absolutely. Because oftentimes marketing is closest to the customer. I mean, my dealerships, car dealerships that I call on have to use this product. And I mean, one of the leading indicators that we look at is how recently did they log in. I mean, if people haven't logged into our systems, we know they're not using it. So we know that there's not a perception that they're getting much value out of it. So maintaining and being on the pulse of all of these different KPIs is a little stressful, but we keep them all intact.
It's really interesting. And it definitely enforces that, again, that concept of collaboration that even in, you know, one criticism that universities constantly have of themselves is that they're too siloed, right? That they're broken in too many pieces that don't connect well enough. And it seems like in the private sector, there's kind of a similar thing that has happened and potentially still happening.
Yes, in fact, the team that I report into is a team, my leader just got promoted to this role, but she actually is now our chief experience officer. So she owns, she used to be the chief marketing officer, now she's the chief experience officer, but she picked up product, engineering and design, and marketing because we couldn't have those silos anymore and do what's best for our consumers and our customers. Because Cars.com is a two-sided marketplace. Dealers sell advertising on the site through their listings, and then consumers come and research cars. So we were just too siloed. So if you throw us all in together and you make us be teammates and you make us have some straight talk, we figured out a lot of things in very short order.
I always think getting rid of silos is a better option. So
absolutely. Absolutely. Believe it or not, if you start with the hypothesis that you have more in common than you don't, like, you will find common ground.
Exactly. And I think that's part of it. And that's also been found in Google's, not only they did Project Aristotle, their project Aristotle was a follow-up to Project Oxygen, and Project Aristotle looked at what makes the perfect team. And the number one, they found it was a 2-year data-driven study that elicited 5 things that constitute a perfect team. And the first one was psychological or emotional safety. And that is that concept of we're a team, we trust each other, we allow ourselves to take risks, potentially fail, and I trust you to hear me out, to be empathic, to do all these things. And there's not going to be retaliation, right? There's not going to be real consequences for me taking a risk, right? And risk can mean opportunity, right?
Right.
So, but that's a really interesting kind of idea of that. A consequence of the de-siloing is then you have all these people working together, and so you want to build that psychological safety so that people are comfortable to have that ultimate success. So,
Agreed. And psychological safety, I mean, when you think about that construct, it seems so obvious, but I think we've all, in some point of our career, have just felt that we weren't safe, that people had agendas, for instance, that weren't working in the team's favor or you as an individual's favor. And unfortunately, those people exist, and everyone's motivated by different things, but hopefully you work with more people that put an emphasis on creating an environment, because you're never going to have those breakthroughs. You're never going to come up with innovative products. If you're always cutting people down at the knees for some idea or some mistake or whatever. I think all of us learn a harder lesson, a more poignant lesson with failure than we ever do with like, oh, that was easy, or that was a raving success. So I just think that that's really important. So I'm glad people think it's important too.
That reminds me of one of the most interesting things I learned about kind of this idea of psychological safety and taking risks and innovation is I went to a talk at a theater here in Los Angeles where a script writer for a cartoon came in and kind of walked the audience through the process of how they write collaboratively as a team. And they gave us he showed us the actual script, and he showed us we need as a team, as a writing team, we need a punchline. And so it was just, I don't remember what the joke was or what the various punchlines that were written, but it was essentially like, here's the script, and then people were just pitching ideas, right? What about this is the punchline? What about, and he was just writing all of them down because he was kind of the team leader, right? He was the head writer. And so he's like, I am not going to punish anybody for their idea, no matter how small, because that idea, no matter how seemingly small or quote unquote bad, could become something much greater, right? Or could inspire someone else. And so he showed us his process of just writing down everybody's different punchlines, and they were all various types of funny and humor. But it was a really interesting process because as someone who has led a staff of people myself, I have done levels of that, but there's a point where sometimes you hear ideas and you're just like, no. but I think giving everyone that I'm going to accept your idea and write it down and make it viable, that will potentially give you more confidence through that psychological safety, where you'll be able to have more innovation, or tap something that maybe people you haven't been allowed to tap, or you haven't had the someone help you tap that sounds really bad, but
tap that, Danielle. We're good.
So on that note, I'm going to move to the next question. So we just have a few questions left. So student, and it was kind of a nice segue without my bad double entendre there. But this is a question about collaboration and team projects. But so students often resist collaborative or team projects despite displaying an understanding of having to work in teams and corporate environments, and oftentimes also having worked in teams in the real world. So what advice would you give to students about the communication skills necessary for effectively working in teams, and how they might develop these skills by working on group projects in college?
Absolutely. So I think that, and I thought about this question. Danielle did share the questions in advance. I thought about how different my experience was 10 years apart from going to undergrad to then going to business school. And I think sometimes you might pick a career that's a little bit individualistic. So I had a degree, undergrad in finance and a second major in economics, and graduated with honors in economics. And it's a singular type of field. It's not a very collaborative field. But then as soon as you graduate and you get your first job, you're sitting in a team. And not to say I didn't learn to share as a child, but I think my business school experience, where I chose the program based on the fact that every single class you had some major component of your grade reliant upon what you contributed in a team. More times than not, 60% of your grade was based on a team project, a team assignment, an ongoing team set of labs, etc. And at least from where I sit, what I learned in that experience was how to, flex into different roles. So for instance, you can't be the A player in my mind in every single team that you're in, or else no one's going to want to work with you. But it's how do you learn to be the B player if you're always like the first person to raise their hand and sign up for things? How can you give poignant feedback that makes the project and the team effort better without cutting people down at the knees and making them feel small? How do you ask for that same feedback? So even if you have the grace of a team and you're not as conversant in the subject matter at hand, for instance, how do you ask people who are more, whenever I got in a team in different places in school, I mean, there was always someone who knew a lot more than I did. So how could you latch onto them to, take a pause sometimes and can you please explain this to me again? I really think that if you're kinder to others and you're kinder to yourself, people will give you kindness and take that pause and make sure that you have understanding. And as long as you're holding your own in that team environment and that team project. So I guess to bring it home again, being able to give and receive good feedback, being able to ask for help, being able to sometimes be the lead, sometimes not be the lead. Those are all skills that what's great about being in academia or still being in school is being able to practice them before you have to take them back out into your career or your teams at work. So just a thought there.
Yeah, and I like that idea of I'm an A or I'm a B. I used to work with somebody who was very confident that they are never they would never be a good in a leadership position. They are a solid B. They are a solid lead up right hand person, secondary position. That was what they felt was strongest for them, and that's what they did. And so it was like, and people sometimes gave this person undue criticism, unsolicited feedback about that, like, oh no, you should have better ambition than that. But when I look back on that, I feel almost guilty for saying anything, because I think it's perfectly fine if someone maybe doesn't want to be the leader, right, or recognizes that they're not, maybe they don't have the skills. I mean, I think it's always worth trying it out.
Yes.
But if you're a solid B, right, or I'm a solid second person, right, or I'm a solid, assistant director or whatever it is, then do that and be the best at it.
Right. I think unfortunately, like nature has an easier time of it, because if you're a giraffe, you're a giraffe. Like you just get to be a giraffe. Whereas I think sometimes, especially in American culture, are definitely taught that everyone should be an A player. And I think as you migrate from being in school or even being in for someone who has not served our country and has never been in the service, but like sometimes it's really clearly defined what your role might be or how rank influences different things. I think in the business world, people like me can't have all A players on my team because they would kill each other and it would be miserable. So everyone is allowed to be who they are, and I definitely have a very finder approach to everybody's a 10 in something. So how can I figure out as quickly as possible what they're really good at and give them enough of that so they want to stay working for me for a long time if they so choose to stay with our company.
Absolutely. I would work for you.
You're
But I'm an
hired.
A.
Yay!
All right. So moving on to a different part of writing, which is presentations, which are an important part of communications. I understand that, and I know that presentations are a key component of your position and the positions that you've had in the past. So what are the top 3 things you do to prepare, for your presentations?
Absolutely. So I will share the fact that the Lisa Farrar that you see on the video today, even with my mistakes and misspoken places, I have at one point in my career been professionally media trained, so I should probably be better than I am. But in order to prepare for presentations, I know this sounds like a Captain Obvious statement, but you just need to prepare and you need to practice. And I'm not saying sit there and script out what you're going to say. I actually try not to script much of what I say because I think that it's inauthentic. I would rather have a mistake than to sit there and look like a robot reading off the teleprompter or what have you. I also sincerely research my audience. I actually had the privilege of speaking at this client experience summit last fall, and I got in advance all of the people who were attending the summit, and I created a little bit of a icebreaker type of activity before I spoke. I had the privilege of speaking right after Magic Johnson, like the Laker of all the fame. And I was really afraid because I'm not very tall, and I'm sitting there and he can put his hand, I'm at his waist and he's putting his hand on my head. And I broke the ice and because I sincerely knew my audience, like everything down to a gentleman who had a PhD in linguistics or someone who built bikes for children for charity. And when you bring those little things, especially to break the ice or to make people kind of feel more welcome, people will listen to you more. And then I think the third thing that I do, and I feel like if we're over time, I'm hoping you'll edit some of this stuff down, but ensure that I would want to hear, I put myself in the audience's shoes and make sure that I'm giving them a message or some type of story that's going to add some value to their life or give them a different perspective, and just ensure that what I'm going to say is something that this audience wants to receive. And I feel like if I don't have that, I work with other people to maybe help me brainstorm to make sure that, and give me feedback, like, this is what I think I'm going to talk about. Is this going to land with you? And sometimes people will give me the feedback of like a different angle or a different idea, etc. So it definitely gets strengthened through collaborating with others before I go prime time with whatever I'm going to talk about.
Trained professional presenter. I wish I had that. I am not.
No. Media training is not fun if you know nothing about it. It's basically sitting there in the hot seat where they're going to ask you very politically decisive questions and see how much you squirm. So not fun.
No, I'd be like, can I write the answers to all of these questions?
Use your strength.
Awesome. Okay. So moving on, going to talk about, these are all, all the questions are kind of tied together with this general idea of communication and writing and technical writing. And now I'm going to move on to argumentation and persuasion, which are also key tenets of humanistic work and writing. And so a lot of students, maybe all the time, are writing argumentation. Excuse me. So, however, many people may not explicitly consider that argumentation and persuasion, they don't necessarily understand the roles that they play in corporate spaces. So one way that argumentation and persuasion is valuable to corporate spaces is directly related to financial investments, such as gaining grant or board funding, bidding on or submitting requests for proposals, what are called RFPs, or persuading your organization to invest in a project or product. And as an example, my students in technical report writing actually put together a grant proposal presentation to a real world RFP. We call them CFPs. So can you provide 1 or 2 examples of how you have effectively used methods of argumentation and persuasion by leveraging your various writing and communication skill sets to gain the necessary funding and support that you sought?
Sure, sure. So I have two examples that I thought of that would maybe help the audience today and how I use both writing as well as PowerPoint and different communications and just a methodology of how I do things and I'm successful in this. So one would be I proposed last winter a large customer experience. So in the industry, we call it CX, customer experience, transformation for cars.com. And what this would take is a 3x investment in what we're invested in Salesforce at present. So increasing what we would invest with them by 3 times, and we would be locked into a contract that wouldn't extend for another 3 years. So lots of money, really high stakes. And I think that in terms of how I put this together is I got a piece of advice from the chief technology officer at cars.com who said, pitch this like you're pitching for seed capital or venture capital on Shark Tank and make the consequences pretty high, but don't exaggerate. Like, so what I did in this experience was actually present the way it feels to be a cars.com customer, anchoring on a specific persona of an internet manager. For instance, this guy who's an internet manager and had threatened to cancel, and I interviewed him and I said, imagine if cars.com could be so much better, we wouldn't get to Tim having to cancel, and then bless her heart, the sales rep, Laura, that calls on him never gets to upsell him because he's always on the verge of canceling. So I painted this whole journey. And then I had a bunch of financial analysis of, okay, yes, we're gonna invest all this money, and yes, it's a 3x, or it's a 3 times larger investment than we do annually, but you know what, it's gonna yield big results. And not only is it going to build big results, I'm going to save my way through time and other contracts, et cetera, that I'm going to offset the complete investment through savings. And then anything revenue-wise that we would generate from incremental sales would just be gravy. So presenting like a case with like a real life example and not only saying, oh, we're going to have all this upside potential, but say, not only are we going to have upside potential, I'm not even including that in my model. I'm only including the savings that I could generate through this because those could be real for the financial counterparts that you have. And then finally, I would say that you need to go on, and there's a great term in Japanese for this, it's called nemiwashi. And if you look it up, it's spelled Nemiwashi in English. I hope I spelled that correctly. Maybe you can fact check me, Danielle, after the fact. But it's the practice of in-selling an idea and persuading people one-on-one before you ever go to a public forum. So back to that idea of iterating your writing or iterating on an idea. If you go and like in private have people poke holes in what you're going to propose to them publicly, they're going to already have had their concerns allayed or their questions answered. Or sometimes people who don't think that other people's ideas are great, like they just sometimes need some space to vent and be like, that's a stupid idea or blah, blah, and sometimes they'll get around to it. So I think that, I guess to bring it home, making sure that you present a very personal story. I mean, business sometimes can be really like cut and dried, but there's always a person or a consumer or a customer or some type of benefit. Someone will get something out of what you're proposing. And I would say that being able to articulate that and make it feel more human takes what you're proposing and the numbers and the financial models to the next level. And then anticipating your audience again over, you're going to have people who are advocates and adversaries. So knowing where they stand, actually, there's this thing you can Google it too. It's, I think, 6 hats, where if you're going to go propose a model, like everybody wears a different hat and you sit there and do your proposal and they wear these different like roles, and some people are just cantankerous and some people are a cheerleader and stuff. But thinking through those things of who your stakeholders are going to be and how you're going to come up to a wall or get a green light, and just being able to navigate those with skill is really important before you get to the big pitch, like pitching to the board of directors. And to bring it home, I ultimately did pitch it to the board of directors. I did that on January 22nd. And before COVID-19, I got full funding for the project. So, you know, things have happened since then, but it was a favorable story with a lot of work.
Awesome examples. And hopefully once the pandemic is over.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so Oh, there was something I was going to latch onto there, and it left me. If it comes back into my head, I will bring it back up.
No
But I will.
problem.
In the meantime, I'll move on to the next question.
Sure.
So, what would you say to college students entering STEM or corporate/business fields that being an effective communicator is not vital of their chosen careers?
So I am not a middle child, believe it or not, but I will very tactfully say, maybe we could think about this again. I think communication skills, as you've probably heard through the last hour or so that we've been connecting, communication skills, both written, verbal, are essential to any field that you select. And it's not only what's going to get you in the door, but it's going to retain people's confidence in your ability to deliver. So if you lean into this and you're talking to someone, again, you can be trained really effectively. I am a resident introvert. I love sitting there reading a book and having a glass of wine all by myself. And then I got a husband and that's all out the window. But anyway, I think that being in a STEM field today, it's especially critical and people are going to expect it. So use this time while you're still in school to practice this art, and where the stakes are not as high as having a boss with like some type of misstep or, being able to over communicate. I think people in business oftentimes, like if you get any global people survey from that's like your employee engagement survey, for instance, everyone is always saying, I crave more communication. Like there's no perfect secret sauce of communication. But if you're just cognizant of it and you think of it every time you're writing an email or every time you're getting up to give a presentation or every interaction that you have, not to make you neurotic, just be like, okay, I'm going to practice this and I'm going to get better over time.
I am neurotic because I teach it. So I'm
True.
constantly giving feedback to people.
True.
So yeah, it's when you're in our position, the people who are doing that grading, we do become neurotic about it. Okay, so I'm going to move on to, I've got 2 more questions.
Sure.
So what's something from your college experience or early career experience that you didn't realize would be vital or instrumental for your career success? And I would love to know, how do you define success?
Sure. So this one's a fun one on a not so fun subject, but I'll share it. When I was at IBM and I joined right out of college and I had not yet become a manager, I took on this role called Worldwide Resource Coordinator. And what this meant is I coordinated 22,000 resources across all of software labs across, like, I guess we were on 5 continents at the time. So I had teams in Hyderabad, I had teams in Shanghai, I had teams in Israel, I had a team in Mexico, I had a team in Silicon Valley, I had a team in New York. And I had a mentor, her name was Jeanette Haran, and she was the first ever software development lab, like senior vice president. And she was someone who was probably the most stoic, cookie cutter IBM executive you could ever imagine. I'll never forget. So she's this mentor of mine, and I'm reporting out on some worldwide resource investment, because when you think about software development, it's all your people. And Jeanette, I kid you not, brought up in a meeting a level of reduction in force that we would need to make. And I'm getting first wind of this while I'm sitting in the same meeting with my boss and the controller for the software lab. And I mean, I'm sitting there saying, I know these people's clock numbers, like this amount of reduction in force, and I'm maybe 3 years out of school or something like that. It hits people I know. Like, this isn't just like those people across the pond or what have you. These are people where I know Dana Marsh has been with the company for 17 years. Like, is she the worst of the worst? And I'll never forget having a follow-up meeting with her as a mentor, saying, and I had the privilege of meeting with her maybe twice a year. I mean, she wasn't like an informal mentor. She was like a formal IBM mentor and a woman in leadership that I was supposed to emulate and stuff. And I'll never forget her giving me this advice in a very diplomatic and tactful way of saying, whenever reductions in force happen, people and the company are oftentimes stronger as a result of it. And you just need to be confident that what we do here, we are not a nonprofit. We work at the bequest of our shareholders and not the associates. And I was like, whoa, that is a dose of straight talk I have never gotten personally to my face, but at least I was able to see this tenured IBM executive and get in her head about how she thought about something that I was really emotional about. Like, I knew the clock numbers, I knew the people, and I feel like the reason why it was so poignant in my experience is because I haven't always, I mean, I've pissed some people off. I've gotten laid off in my career. If you're not taking risks and growing, you're maybe not me. So it just happens. And I think that reflecting back on that piece of advice, which is probably 20 years old now, has never been more critical in the way that I think about success, because I think about success in a way of like, for instance, I got a stupid meme that says like losers quit when they fail, whereas people who are winners like continue to fail until they succeed, or something trite like that. I just think that in my mind, I have been more successful, for instance, and I would encourage you all to learn as much as you can while you're still in school, to bring these skills back out to the workplace. And I'm not saying it's super cutthroat or what have you, but there will be people who are your champions and there are people that might be your derailers. So how you skillfully learn to navigate them. So in terms of like the way that I envision success, I would say being comfortable in your own skin. Back to that notion of some people are A's and some people are B's. Like, know what you are, know what you're good at, know your worth. Live your life in accordance with your own personal values. No one else is going to define those for you. And then finally, you should have some pride in what you do every day. If what you do every day grates on your soul, like, I'm not that person that is trite and is going to say, oh, like, I love what I do, so I've never worked a day in my life. No, I've worked. I like a paycheck. I have a husband that likes nice things. And it's one of those things where I eventually had to pay off like my school debt. So yeah, I had to get a job. And there's been ones where there have been days where it's just like, oh, I'd like to tell them I don't care anymore, and I'm gonna see you later. I'm gonna pack my stuff and I'll see you later. But you know what? I think that being able to live that way keeps you very integritous, and people will appreciate that about you. So you define success for yourself, and it's not monetary to me.
Thank you for sharing that, especially that personal anecdote about Jeanette. It, as most things do, it brought up the question of gender, and which is maybe for a different interview, but because that's a whole topic. But you know, she's a woman in a what did they call IBM workers back in the day? Or no, they just called IBM Big Blue. Is that what it was called?
Big Blue, yeah.
Big Blue.
Yeah.
But she was a Big Blue worker, right? In the traditional days of IBM, this female executive,
right,
and professional mentor to another rising female executive. And I'm curious as to if gender has played into your definition of success. I know you just said that success, you do not define it monetarily, but in terms of how, things that you did from your college experience and early career experiences that you didn't realize would be vital or instrumental. Does gender factor into that at all, especially being in the automotive industry that is a historically male-dominated industry and still is, I believe?
Yeah, I will say that, yes, gender has played a role in my success. Another kind of not so early career experience, but kind of funny if you want to include this, is how when I started in automotive 11 years ago, I called on a territory of dealers on the south side of Chicago. And this was before I was married and probably 40 pounds lighter than I am now. And I kid you not, like, I had little nicknames like Cookie and Muffin and Kitten. And I actively chose, and my mom is a staunch feminist who was like, a woman can do anything a man wants to do. Like, you can do it better, all these things. My dad's very prideful of having 2 daughters. He raised us like sons, but it was a good thing type of environment. And I just knew that I could either like lean into it or resist it. And I didn't ever think about Me Too. It was never on like the horizon. I actually took it as if they didn't have a name for me, because they had names for everybody, I wasn't in the fold. So I made a conscious decision to not put my foot down about that, because I was like, okay, this will make my job easier. I'll get my bonus. I'll get paid, blah, blah, blah. And I think that flash forward 11 years, I was telling our chief strategy officer the story, and he like flipped his like, I told him this on International Women's Day at our little like company, like speaker series or what have you. And his mind blew. He's someone who came from his parents being both doctors. He went to Princeton, and he had a very different kind of socioeconomic climate of what was acceptable. And I just knew that if I put my neck out and like resisted it, I wouldn't get paid, and getting paid was more important than me putting up a wall. And I think that what I asked him to do in that instance was the fact that when women are being treated that way, it wasn't like I was just one-on-one oftentimes. Like, I think that women sometimes may not be able to, like, especially if they're junior in their career or they're worried about their job, be able to stand up for themselves. But if he as a man would have just been like, hey guys, like, like, what are you doing? And just call people out on it a little bit, he could have probably gotten away with it with a level of levity and just made it not a big deal. So I just think that sometimes men can have women's back in that instance and do it in a way with, like, you know, just humility and not necessarily like being the appropriateness police or what have you. So I think to bring it home, I've probably taken advantage of being in male-dominated careers my whole career, because I think that automotive and IT and finance are not necessarily for the faint of heart. And I think that I've just leaned into it. In fact, I would say that it's been easier in companies for me where there have been less women, because I just have oftentimes been more of, not that I'm a guy's girl. I always, if you get to know me, I wear dresses a lot. My hair is curled. Like, I am a woman. I don't feel like I have to look like a man when I show up to work or what have you. But I just feel like I'm very pragmatic. I get to the point. I've been accused of being direct. I've been accused of being lots of nasty words too. So I just think that it's sometimes a little bit easier, and it's unfortunate that I've experienced that in that way. But I try to be a good woman leader to other women, and take those lessons of, like, you know, poor examples of women in the workplace, and just put them in my mental file so I can write a book with Danielle one day on all my little stories, and we'll both be millionaires and we won't have to work anymore. So, but yeah, I guess to bring it home, like, I looked up to Jeanette. She gave me a very stoic answer, and it was something that kind of like helped me snap out of the emotional, hard situation that I was in right then. So she gave me what I needed, and that's what mentorship is.
So was she filed away under the good female leaders?
She would, because I mean, when I think about her being the leader, there had never been a woman leader of a software development force. I mean, this is 50,000 IBM employees. I mean, there had never been a woman at that level. And this is not like 1980. This is literally like 2007.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Thank you for going on that tangent with me. I think the gender aspect is that's definitely something I would like to do more with later. So I have one more question, and then we'll be wrapping up. But my last question circles back to how we open the interview. So, and there's no pressure to this question. You can answer it the same way you did during the first go around. But I'm curious as to whether our conversation today might reinform or reconsider or get you to rethink your personal and or professional identity as a writer.
That is a really good question. And this was not one that I had in advance. So I'm really excited to answer this one. I would say yes, it's reframed my mindset. I see people sometimes where, you know, they're describing who they are on their like food blog or their Instagram feed or their LinkedIn. Of course I say, oh yeah, sure, you're a writer, like whatever. But I think that all of us, if we are going to be effective, need to be skillful in writing. And it doesn't need to be verbose, and it doesn't need to be fancy, but it definitely needs to be effective. So I would say that if I could go back to my 8th grade self with Sister Mary Eileen McCarthy and my little Catholic school I went to in Podunk Town in Virginia, she'd be very proud for me to say, yes, you're a writer, because she taught me how to do all those sentence diagramming and that perfect script I guess how to do. So yes, I too am a writer, and yes, you are a writer.
All right. And like I said, there's no pressure in answering that question the second time around.
No problem.
All right. So again, I want to thank Lisa Farrar for joining Page Break. You have been so immensely generous with your time as well as your
My pleasure,
answers.
Danielle. Anytime. Thank you guys. I hope you've stayed along for the journey with us.
But are there any final thoughts? And there don't have to be, but if you have any final thoughts or closing comments that you would suggest to, or about anything, or that you would suggest to those learning technical writing as part of non-humanities degree programs and how it could benefit them in their personal and professional lives, or anything along those lines, that felt like a really leading question, and it is not meant to be. But yeah, go for it.
I think that in terms of just kind of like two final thoughts, if it's okay, I think that, and I mentioned this earlier, but I wanted to give a little bit more clarity on the thought of practicing. So if you are like, okay, people tell me to practice, and I'm not just saying like get up in front of a mirror, but I mean, watch things like TED Talks, or watch things like Brene Brown, or like if you want to get better at communicating, that's a great way to learn these things. And if it's in the written form, have people, be generous of your writing, have people critique it, and then critique theirs, because it's like a two-way stream before you have to hand it off to Danielle. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that notion of practice, because you will get better. And if you have a little bit of, I think there's a free Grammarly, so check out Grammarly. And then the last thing that I'll say is, and it'll also, I think, help you, I think it'll also talk about plagiarism if you're writing technical papers for Danielle. So, you may want to make sure you're not doing that in school. We do it in business all the time. We just put quotes and cite it, and it's fine. But anyway, net, my last thing is, you see my name in the bottom of the screen. You're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I am not a professional coach, but I've had 1 million lives, and I just look really young for being 100 years old. So if you need help, or if you just want a different perspective, or you want to phone a friend in Chicago and brag about your beautiful weather you guys have there, like, I'm always just a LinkedIn connection away, and I have a fairly powerful network. So if there's someone, if you need to get a job, I usually, between going to business school or what have you, on the other side of it, if you need like a referral or an introduction, I always offer to anyone I say, please connect with me, that I will say, hey, this is how I met this person, and I will introduce you to whomever's in my network. So the world is an exciting place, and I wish you guys all the best of luck, and I just want to thank you guys for sticking with us and listening to us today. It's been a pleasure joining you. So thank you for having me on Page Break.
It has been amazing having you as our first guest on Insert One of Page Break, focusing on Lisa Farrar and the automotive industry. And just to tie back, I would emphasize that point of watching yourself as a teacher. I've had to record and watch myself teach, which is incredibly painful to do. You become aware of all your tics and all your affects. Same with presenting. Same with anytime I record videos, I will be rewatching this interview, for example, because I am always looking to improve. So I will notice things about myself, and I will say, don't, stop doing that. When I record videos for students for classes, I will listen to them, and it's how I have been working on not using verbal fillers, is I will just pause. And so and I've also read that pausing is sometimes a good thing, because it allows for the listener or the viewer to process information more or register what you're saying. So pausing is not necessarily a bad thing. So I learn a lot about my own communication. I teach it, but I'm not perfect at it by any means. I know best practices, but I try.
Right.
But I struggle. So
absolutely. You and me both, sister.
So thank you again. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you. Maybe down the line we can have you on again. And
best of luck.
Yes, best of luck to you. Thank you again, and thank you for joining Page Break. Very appreciating your viewership. See, I do sometimes have a problem speaking, but it's practice. It's that authentic messing up words, and as a teacher you get used to it. You're just like, I messed it up, big deal, I don't care. So
right. No problem.
All right, and thank you. Hopefully you will tune into the next interview, and thank you again, Lisa. Very much appreciate your time.
Bye guys. Stay healthy.
Bye.
Bye.